Good morning, I'm Pastor Doug, Pastor Emeritus at the Orchard, and this is Tuesday of Holy Week. We're going to look at those events that took place on Tuesday. A couple of days ago, we looked at Palm Sunday, Jesus' entry into Jerusalem, and then yesterday, his cleansing of the temple. And so now we come to Tuesday. Jesus has spent the night before at Bethany, and with his disciples, he's come back into Jerusalem, and these events transpire primarily in the temple. You can imagine, after cleansing the temple the day before and driving out the money changers, he was confronted by the powers that be when he came back into the temple. First by chief priests and scribes. They had the most to lose from when Jesus expelled the money changers. And then there were the Sadducees, who were a powerful part of the Jewish leadership, and then the Pharisees. And they confronted him, each in their own way, seeking to discount him, to entrap him, or to actually move him into some statement that may get him arrested and eventually executed, which they had previously determined. Now, these three different groups of the hierarchy of the Jewish faith, the chief priests presided in the temple over the sacrifices and all of the other things that happened there. But in these days, they were primarily political appointees, and they had a lot invested in keeping the status quo, with the Jewish religion exerting its power over the people throughout Judea. The Sadducees, they were what we might call secularist. They hoped to move the Jewish people in the direction of becoming more like Romans, less enmeshed in keeping the finer points of the law. Opposite from the Pharisees. The Pharisees were highly vested in keeping the law and making sure that others would keep the law. The Pharisees had come into existence probably several 100 years previous, when the Jewish people were contested by the secular powers of Syria and told they could no longer keep the Sabbath or circumcision or have their Torah. And the people at that time revolted, called the Maccabean Revolt. And from that day forward, there were those who were staunch defenders of keeping the law, and thus were the Pharisees. Jesus had encountered these powers that be many times in his ministry. Now it was called coming down to a head. And he primarily addresses these scribes and Pharisees in chapter 23 of Matthew, where he takes what Matthew describes as a whole chapter of rebuke of the Pharisees. And we'll see why, the primary reason. Jesus said to them, the scribes and Pharisees are seated in the chair of Moses. So listen to what they teach, but don't do what they do. He said, they tie up heavy loads that are hard to carry and put them on people's shoulders, but they themselves aren't willing to lift a finger to move them. Here's two things. One is that the Pharisees have expanded upon the basic law, the basic 10 commandments, to include all kinds of minutiae in order to keep the people from breaking the primary law. For example, keeping the Sabbath. They had added laws like how many steps you could take on the Sabbath, or what you could lift, or what you couldn't cook. So they have made all these small laws that have been imposed on the people because the Pharisees perhaps honestly felt that if they could get the Jewish people to keep the commandments one day, that God would send the Messiah. But the other part was, Jesus says they're hypocrites. They teach the law, but they don't keep the law. So the primary problem with the Pharisees was that in their zeal for keeping the law and imposing that law judgmentally and legalistically on others, they had not made a way to God. They have put a barrier between the people and God, a barrier that no one, not even themselves, would be able to overcome. And so they had restricted people from knowing and loving God by focusing their attention on keeping hundreds of laws. And Jesus' intention was to restore the people to God, that he would do later on in the week through his crucifixion and his resurrection. And so these two primary things, they have made the law odious and heavy on the people, thus blocking them from knowing God, and they don't even keep them themselves. He goes through 8 woes here. Let me just give you a sense or a taste of these. Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You shut the door to the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. You don't go in, and you don't allow others to go in either. That's the primary criticism that Jesus has. He calls them the blind leading the blind. He says you strain out a gnat. In other words, you keep the smallest minutiae of a law, but you swallow a camel. You let the large things, the important things of the law go by while you attempt to keep the minutiae. And so Jesus goes through 8 of these. Woe to you, Pharisees, on this Tuesday of Holy Week. Then Tuesday, what they observe and where we are now, of Passover week. And so the primary confrontation that Jesus has with the Pharisees happens on that Tuesday of Holy Week. God bless you as you consider these things, as we take these steps with Jesus and his disciples during Holy Week. And we will see you tomorrow.